So I'm joined today by Bushra Amiwala, and I'm so excited to have her on the show. She is running for Congress in Illinois' 9th District, and she's 27 years old. And so I saw her on my good friend Coach D's show, and I love that interview. And so shout out to Coach D who hooked us up, and here we are. So welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me, Tennessee Brando, and it's awesome to be here. And I had a great chat with Coach D as well, and maybe we'll chat about different things. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And one thing I was really impressed by, I'll say sometimes on the channel that I've been talking politics my whole life, but you got involved. I mean, you went out there and am I right? You were 19 when you first ran for a position?
Exactly. I was 19 years old when I first launched my political campaign.
That is truly awesome. So have you always been political your whole life? Is it something you always wanted to be a part of?
I think I didn't realize how political my life was until far later in life. Everything from the resources that we had growing up, now all of that is political. Healthcare is political, SNAP is political, FAFSA and tuition assistance for higher education is suddenly political. Back then, I think these were just awesome things that government provided to give me the boost that I needed to have access to a great life in this country. And now it's all political. That being said, though, my spirit of service stemmed from the spirit of gratitude. And it just was in the nonprofit world for a while. I never saw myself in the political space. And it's hard to imagine yourself existing in a realm where you don't see someone who looks like you already there.
Yeah, and it's really crazy how these issues did become political, and the parties found a way to get people pitted against their own interests. And I deal with that a lot where I'm from in Tennessee. You have people who I think they have the best of intentions, but they wind up voting against their own interests and their own selves. And that's one of those things that I feel like is a real challenge for us to get by.
100%. And I think it's a cheap shot at getting people to fight amongst themselves while maintaining this state of distraction, so we don't actually see who the real perpetrators are and who's actually in control around our country.
Yeah, I was looking at your website and I was really impressed. I love the things, your priorities, the things you're wanting to fight for. And one that is big for me in Tennessee would be education. And I loved one of the quotes on your website said, "Education should be a pathway to opportunity and not a lifetime of debt." So, what can you do to make public college tuition free and help to cancel student loan debt?
So first, every public and modern country in the world that exists right now has at least one sort of higher education public option that exists, whether it be trade school, whether it be after high school, whether it be community college or some sort of that. The United States is the only modern country in the world that does not have that option readily available for its students. And I think that's intentionally designed. If we look at tuition rates and how much they've increased in just the past 20 years alone, that is excluding an entire demographic of people from even having college and higher education as an option, whether it be trade school, whether it be community college, whether it be private or public university options. I have friends who I went to high school with who went on to be drafted in the NFL, perform on Broadway, and work at NASA. And I have peers that could have done all that and more, but could not afford to go to college and did not see that as an option for themselves. And it's quite simple. Something like community college is designed to be a cost-effective, if not free, public-funded model that already exists. But for some reason, education is always the first tadpole that this country attacks.
Yeah, one of the things that we deal with in Tennessee is there's the kids grow up, and I've got a 25-year-old son. So, he goes out into the world and he's looking to make a way for himself. And then when he gets out there, he comes back and says, "Dad, I can't make it in this world. I can't get ahead." Then you have people that winds up falling into bad habits where I'm from. They wind up doing other things to make income. So it really becomes a hard way to go for kids your age. And I say the word kid because I'm not trying to call you a kid, but I'm just saying I've got a 25-year-old son. So to me, that's a kid. But we're still in Tennessee. We're at like $7.25 for a minimum wage, which is hard for me to even wrap my mind around. And that's why I want to talk to you about that. And how do you think we can go about raising the minimum wage and help people to understand that that's something that's so needed these days?
There was a time just 10, 15 years ago when we were talking about the fight for minimum wage and raising the federal minimum wage to $15. And we see today that even a number like $15 as a federal minimum wage is outdated. if we
Yeah.
actually look at the cost of inflation, the cost of living, and what it looks like to survive, not even just like live, but to just survive in this country, the actual minimum wage, we should be advocating for $27 as that.
Mhm.
And we're not even close to being there just yet, meaning something like demanding a $15 or a $17 federal minimum wage is table stakes right now. We're seeing working class people be at the current grunt of barely being able to make it by and scrap by in this country. And then on top of that, you have healthcare debt. On top of that, you have student debt. And then you question why this generation isn't able to purchase and own a home at the same breath, too.
Yeah, and we're starting to see a lot of young people get behind candidates like Mamdani in New York because he's bringing a message that they can relate to, which is, I've always said, is one Bernie Sanders has been saying for 50 years. So how do we get over these hurdles? Like, how do we finally make a message like that stick?
I think it's authenticity, actually. There's something about seeing Mamdani as a young brown Muslim man saying these things where it's like, I actually believe what you're saying because I feel like you've experienced some of this too. That level of sincerity, genuinity, and authenticity is really a difference between someone who might be saying the same message, to your point, like a Bernie Sanders, to someone who you can actually see yourself in. And I think that's why the Democratic Party is finding themselves right now at this turning point where the current people that are representative of that party are doing the bare minimum of what everyday people are expecting that party to champion from a values and messaging standpoint.
I agree with that totally, and I'm glad you brought that up because one of the questions I had, do you think we will ever see the Democratic establishment ever understand? I don't think they can win on their own. I really don't. I think if they just try to go with that middle of the road centrist Democrat again, we're just going to keep losing. So do you think they will ever come around to embracing the Mamdani kind of message that the people are behind? It's hard for me to wrap my mind around why can't they just listen to the room, And
it's because you look at who is funding their political campaigns that gets them into elected office. So I think, no, the current establishment Democrats probably will never get there, but they will not be the ones that are keeping up with the move that the party is shifting towards. As the tide is changing in one direction, those establishment Democrats will, candidly speaking, probably not be there either. And I think Mamdani's victory in June was an example and an opportunity for every Democrat to get behind him and endorse him. He was the Democratic nominee, yet the inability to do so was so telling to every other person in this country.
Yeah, one thing that I've told people is, I really think when Donald Trump first came along, I mean, the Republican Party of that day, they really didn't want him. The Mitch McConnells of the world did not want Trump at first, but they realized they were going to lose without him. And so they got behind Donald Trump for all the wrong reasons. And my question's always been, why can't the Democratic establishment get behind someone for all the right reasons, And
I think that, unfortunately, could be ego. It could be this idea, this self-serving prophecy that, well, I'm smarter and I'm more credible and I have more years of experience that people might think to themselves. But I think the truest, utmost form of leadership is servant leadership, where you remove yourself from the equation and it's not about you as an individual.
Yeah, I agree with that. And there's one thing, in the Democratic establishment too, that's always like, well, this person's next, this person's next in line and they're more qualified. And really, you could make that argument in a lot of cases. I've always went back to, if you went back to the Bush, the George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton election of 92. I mean, you could argue that George H.W. Bush was more qualified at that particular point in history. He had more experience under his belt. But Bill Clinton resonated with people back then because he was speaking to the issues that they were most cared about. And I think the Democrats have kind of lost their way on a lot of that, and they would better suit themselves to go back to the basics. I mean, look at FDR, everything we were ever founded on. If they just went back to that basic principles of what we stood for, I think you would see. I don't think Trump is as hard to beat as they've made it out to be.
Yeah, and I think the way that we measure qualifications and credentials is different in 2025. It's different from when it was even in 2019. Right now, what makes you a qualified, credible person is being able to speak to the issues that you care about and to be unbought. Like, that really is what makes you a credible, qualified person in my eyes today in 2025 as a candidate. It's like, are you unbought and do you actually believe the things that you are saying? That is the true definition of what it means to be a true leader right now. And that definition is one that maybe wasn't as universally accepted even back in 2019 or a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and we're seeing so many, of the establishment Democrats. You can always see when they're answering. It's almost as though they're reading off the pamphlet, and that's so frustrating to me because there's nothing authentic about that. And like you said, I think one of the things about Mamdani that just made him resonate was that he was relatable He talked to the people. He didn't talk down to them. He didn't come off like, "Hey, it's my turn. Hey, I'm smarter. Just trust me." And I think that's one of the reasons why that we've seen him do well. And I think that's why that more people are looking for candidates like that all across the country. But another thing that I want to talk to you about, we've had all this talk about the Epstein files. I saw a really good clip that came out from the victims talking about that. And, I can't believe we're at a place in American history where this is an issue that's, again, how we've made this political. Yeah. So what do we do going forward if we can get past this moment in time? What do we do going forward to ensure that victims will be protected and we will listen to them over the powers that be?
I really hope that this is something that every single person to their core continues to know, that they have to listen to victims, have to listen to survivors, and it is not something that needs to be political at all. To your point, I mean, we saw someone like Adelita Grijalva in Arizona 7th Congressional District not be sworn in for almost 47 days because of this government shutdown, knowing that she would be the singular deciding vote required to release the Epstein files. Like, this is not something that should have been prolonged to this point, because at the end of the day, the average American, does it change the way they live their life, something like the Epstein files? Perhaps not. However, this is something that's a true detriment to the types of leaders that we have representing us in Washington. So where is the bright line between accountability and things being prolonged for the sake of people trying to cover themselves right now?
Yeah, I just really hope that if anything, this is a learning experience for all of us, and it's one of those things we can learn from and grow, because it's just been so frustrating watching it turn into a political moment, and it comes down to like, oh, well, what Democrats on the list? Well, now wait a minute, there's a Republican on the list, and it's not about that. I think that went over so many people's head.
Agree, and it's like, regardless of what party affiliation, I'm concerned that someone's on this list, regardless of their party affiliation. And I think everyday Americans are as well. We're seeing right now, it's the 1% versus the 99% rest of us, and it's bought versus unbought. Regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, you're bought on both fronts, unfortunately.
That's very true. And, one thing I wanted to get your opinion on, I saw an interview with Michelle Obama where she recently said that she didn't think it was possible that a female could ever be elected president. Do you agree with that, or how do you feel about that one?
I saw that clip too, and Michelle Obama spoke in a way where she said, as a country, like, we are just not ready for anyone, actually, whether it be a woman of color, a person of color. Like, she was the closest to the Obama administration, and the amount of preconceived notions and stereotypes, and even the differences in how people spoke about someone simply because of their racial or sexist undertones that existed. And I think beyond the sexism piece, I think there's so much our country is not ready for just yet. But I also think that appetite is being met with a rejection of what we've always been served as well, for the sake of the metaphor. So I do think the way that we stand right now, like, we need to get really beyond whether it be the sexism and racism that's entrenched in the founding of our country. And I think we will be ready in a very short period of time. But the way that things are divisive right now, we're all just in echo chambers. The world is intentionally designed where, whether you consume your media through social media or a specific news channel, you're constantly being fed a narrative that is already affirming what you already believe to be true. And that is what's making it very dangerous, and why our country's unprepared right now.
Yeah, and it's so sad as I'm hearing you say that, because I just remember going back to Obama being elected, and I thought, okay, we've made progress. And a friend of mine told me one time, he said, "Yeah, but there's the pendulum always swinging, and there's always people that's going to react to something." And I really do believe that Donald Trump was a product of the people who were reacting in protest to Obama. And it's just sad to me that we're having this conversation in 2025, because if you'd have told me back when I was back even when I was your age, Obama was getting elected when I was your age, and I would have said, "Oh, we'll be way past that in 2025." So to hear you say, we have to get to this point, it's a point we should have been at a long time ago.
I totally agree. And I see the pendulum example all the time as well. But each time the pendulum swings back into the direction it was, it's incremental inches of progress that's being made. Mm-hmm. And I think that my generation is an example of a generation that's not going to wait for our turn. We're not going to wait for a specific time. We're demanding that time be made and curated right now. And historically, maybe that type of urgency and demand hasn't been made as clearly. But even I remember myself when I was first running for public office in 2017. This was 3 months after Trump was first inaugurated as our president. And we saw the way people talked about Hillary Clinton's pantsuits that entire election cycle. And newspapers would write about my stylish light pink hijab after debates and forums, not touching on the actual concrete substance of what I had just spoken about in that forum as well.
Yeah. And, so tell us a little bit. I want to know a little bit about your upbringing and, how you've dealt with that misogyny and that racism as your life, has progressed. Has it gotten better, worse? Where are we at?
So I remember I was on a live TV interview back when I was first running, and the anchor said, Bushra, with ageism, racism, sexism, and Islamophobia all working against you, which would you say is the worst? And it's not the game show I signed up to be on, but I do remember innately answering sexism without hesitation. It's my intersection as an identity of a woman that makes every other ism and phobia uniquely more amplified in a negative way. So I'm not just a young person, I'm a young woman. I'm not just a person of color, I'm a woman of color. And I'm not just a Muslim person, I'm a Muslim woman. And that intersection of me being a woman makes every other ism and phobia that exists in the fabric of our country amplified. What is a little bit different now is that I'm in the acceptance phase where I know that I may not be the singular tipping point that pushes someone from pushing their preconceived notions beyond what they're actually open to meeting someone of a different background, but I can try. And I'm focusing on the two things I can control, which is my intention and my effort. In my intentions to make a really positive difference in my community, and my effort is how I show up every single day. The rest is not in my hands.
One thing I'm really glad to see is folks like you just owning it and saying, this is who I am unapologetically, because I feel like that, after 9/11, there was a lot of, there still is a lot of fear mongering that goes on. But I loved when Mamdani was on stage. He's like, I am a Muslim and I'm not apologizing. And I'm like, you shouldn't have to. We live in a world, we have freedom of religion. I tell people this all the time. We have freedom of religion. It doesn't matter. It's what the person does and, with their life and how they contribute to society and try to make it a better world, try to leave the world better than you found it. So I applaud you for just, saying this is who I am unapologetically. I feel like that we need more of that. And I think people, even if they do disagree with you, I think more people will just respect, like you said, the authenticity of this is me. Yeah.
Agreed. And I think on both sides, right? You have the people that look up to you. I see people that see themselves in me that are not young Muslim women. They will be queer, older Black men who also see themselves in me. Because when you show up authentically, you are accepting parts of you that are shining beyond what's out here in the physical and in the exterior. And when I function in that way, I find that I'm bringing others along for the ride and conversation to see me, relate to me, and see parts of me beyond my affinity and my demographic that I represent on a physicality front too. And we do have more in common than we don't. But I do think that the hate and divisive nature that's been ingrained in our country prevents us from getting there.
Yeah. And how do you think as we go forward that we'll be able to pull people together? I really think that, personally, I just feel like that the more that people realizes, hey, the Republican Party didn't have our best interests at heart. Trump definitely didn't. He was really in it for himself. I hate to say it, but maybe as more people struggle, will that be what brings us together or how do we get there?
Honestly, I do think that when people are in survival mode, the last thing they can think about is unity on that front because people are really just trying to get by. People's emotions are higher. They're more tense in that way. And I don't know if it takes hitting rock bottom to get to this place of unity, but I do think that is a state that might have to be created first before there's any sort of unification on that front, because right now the current narrative is intentionally designed to point the finger and blame someone else who looks a certain type of way, who's from a different country as the reason why you're struggling. And until we address the core of quote unquote, who is responsible for the current state of our nation, that is the only thing that can change the sentiment. And it's pointing the fingers at the billionaires and the oligarchs that run our country.
Yeah. I've seen so many people where I'm from, and I've been preaching this to them for years. I see them get worked up and worried about things that's never going to come to East Tennessee where I'm from. They're never going to face it. They're never going to deal with it. It's not something, but they get so scared of something. And then you have Fox News, have all the right wing echo chambers. And in my part of the world, you have the Bible Belt. You have the churches that I don't think people really understand just how much, this is from a Southerner's perspective, that stuff is ingrained in us from the time we're kids, that D really stands for the devil, more so than it does Democrat. It just becomes a talking point. And then to have someone suddenly break from that, you're not just asking them to vote for a different political candidate. You're asking them to go against everything they were ever taught as a kid, everything their grandparents stood for. So it's their whole upbringing and identity that then you're saying to them, we need you to step away from that. And that's really hard, I think, for some people outside my part of the world to understand, but it's also hard to get through to the people where I'm from that, hey, we've just been used and manipulated. That's how I feel. I feel like we've been used and manipulated for so long by the churches and by the media that, I think it's going to take a lot of time for us to realize which way we need to be going on these things.
Yeah, and I don't think that one party is to blame on the other. I think I grew up in a really progressive town right here in Skokie where being Republican was the R word. And it goes on both sides. I think both sides of the aisle, every single person with their own political ideology and belief is in an echo chamber because of media and social media. And that is the most dangerous state a human mind can be in, because when we see public radio being defunded, when we see public education being defunded, we know that's intentionally being done to reduce our critical thinking skills, because that actually is all we have at the end of the day, to read beyond the headlines, to read beyond the clickbait, and to actually comprehend and understand what we care about. And I think that is what really fears me about the way that we consume information.
Yeah, it's crazy, because I was telling a friend of mine the other day, I said, this day and age, we take in more information in a day's time than my grandfather did, back when he was a kid. There's just so much information. And then a lot of times people do go looking for what will comfort them the fastest, like what kind of fits my preconceived notion. And we're all guilty of falling into those echo chambers. That's why that I always try to, to go outside that and listen to everyone and what they're saying. Because it's always interesting too when you meet someone who you have strong disagreements with, and you're almost to the point of coming to blows. You're so intense about it, but then they say something that will stop you in your tracks and make you think, and you look at things differently. So have you ever had that happen to you? Have you ever been in a situation where you might have strongly disagreed with someone on the opposite side, but then they made a point that you said, wait a minute, I never quite looked at it that way?
Honestly, I'm what I call myself a radical empath. I used to be on the debate team in high school growing up, and I coached debate for a little bit in undergrad too. And when you're on the debate team, you're given one issue and you need to be prepared to be pro or against this issue, regardless what the topic is. That means I have really learned how to understand every single side of an argument. And with that, I've come to my personal core's beliefs. That being said, I also can understand where someone is coming from, even if I disagree with them. And I think that nuance is something that allows me to listen more than I need to argue and debate, because sometimes it's recognizing there will not be common ground in certain issues. Sometimes there is, but when people are talking about something like immigration and the way that the current administration has been deploying ICE agents in my hometown here in Chicago and beyond, there is no common ground with you have one group saying deport them all and you have another saying let's not kidnap our neighbors without any sort of due process. But then for some issues, there is a mutual ground. And I think universal healthcare is a really good example of that. I've been finding that people will find out that this is the economically viable and fiscally responsible mode for our country to adopt to. And suddenly someone who identifies as a right-wing Republican believes that the universal healthcare model is what's best for our country because they were brought on board with a different argument to appeal to them.
That's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that across, because I really do believe that when it winds up hitting the person the closest, like, I've got two elderly parents I'm taking care of. I've got progressive viewpoints. I've got a cousin who's taking care of his elderly mom. He's on the opposite side of the fence politically, but we could get on the same boat on the universal health care. We could get on the same boat with that because we're both facing that same thing. And so maybe as we're going forward, if we can steer more and more people away from these culture wars and get them back to the issues that we're all facing together, maybe that's the bridge that we can find some common ground on.
It is, and it sounds really kumbaya these days, but I tell people we all just care about having safe communities, good access to public schools, and to be able to survive and to afford our goods, gas, and groceries. That's actually it. Like, it really does boil down to that is what people in this country are looking for. And the fact that is what this land was founded and promised on, and we are not able to comfortably say that that's what we're receiving, should send alarm signals to every single person in any leadership power in this country.
Yeah, and before we go, there's one thing I would love to ask you and hear your take on. Like, what would you say to young folks out there that are interested in getting in the political process and getting involved? What advice would you give to them as they go forward in their own political careers at a young age?
The advice I give to young people that are hoping to get involved in the political process is whatever you start to do it consistently. So if you're going to volunteer for 1 hour a week, make sure you volunteer for 1 hour a week every single week. Make sure that if you want to donate a penny to a charity every day, donate a penny to a charity every day. Whatever you do, start doing it consistently, because we are the generation that gets accused of leaning into our emotions, being out in rallies and protests, and then not doing tangible action afterwards. Absolutely not. Whatever we do, we will do consistently. And it's those consistent acts that will take us to where we need to be.
That's really good. And also, before we go, let everyone know where they can find you, because I would love for people to be more familiar with what you're doing.
Yes, I'd love to stay connected. My website is bushraforcongress.com. It's my first name for Congress. And I'm on all socials at Bushra Amiwala. I respond to all my DMs except for the mean ones on Instagram.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been great having you. You're welcome back here anytime. It was a great conversation, and I wish you the very best.
Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.
Thank you.